everybody. Welcome. Today, we have our friend Eric Doring from TWC Construction with us, and we're doing a webinar on one of his favorite topics. And so I'm looking forward to having some great knowledge as far as facilities and whether you're doing a build to suit or you're doing a remodel or an additional add-on. Eric's going to give us a lot of his tips and tricks. So with that, Eric, I will let you introduce yourself if there's anything else, and go ahead and start the production. If people have questions during the webinar, please put them in the chat and we will answer those questions as they come up.
Okay, well, I'll share my screen here and see if I can't get the slideshow started. Okay. Well, my name is Eric Doring. Like Carrie had said, work with TWC Construction. I've been doing this for almost 20 years. It'll be 20 years next April. So long time in this business. We work in the animal care field. We do veterinary hospitals as well as boarding and daycare facilities, specialty hospitals. So we work kind of all in that arena. Partner grew a couple years ago. The idea behind it was being in touch with maybe some of the people that are more committed to driving the industry forward and doing their part. So it's been a good fit. All the people that we work with on the from the Dog Guru side are awesome, and all of their people engaged in learning are great as well. So we've had a good time. Today's presentation is going to be, do I really need to spend that much? And I know that was a catchy title. I spent a lot of time thinking about that one. But the biggest thing is it's expensive to build, and I think everyone knows that. So I'm going to try and equip everyone in this call with some knowledge on what you can and can't do in the trade-offs. I'm going to start the presentation with the same phrase I'm probably going to end with, which is there is nothing magical in construction. There is no sea fairy that sells things at half price. There is no people that work for half the pay. There is scope. And what I mean by scope is that is what the actual full amount of work is with it. So now what we're going to do is go into what are all those different areas of influence to be able to break down, how do we price it? Now, I'm sure all of you would love for me to tell you exactly what the cost per square foot is on everything. I hate to disappoint you, but that's not going to happen on this call because it's infinite. I can show you, how you're right in one scenario and wrong in another. But I'm going to go into as much detail as I can. You guys can fire away questions as we're going, and I'll tackle those. But we'll get started, and hopefully I'm able to provide you guys some good information. First thing that we need to talk about is the end result. So when you go into a project and you're looking at this, facility that is going to house certain number of animals, you want to be able to provide a certain type of service. I believe most of our clients come to us and they have this vision of this perfect environment. In their head, they would like it to be, they walk through the door and it's an amazing entrance and it's an amazing suite that that their pet is going to be in, and your staff only has smiles on their faces, and this is just this utopia, right? And while I would love for that to be the case, it's probably not going to be like that all the time, but you should be able to experience a lot of that. Your decisions along the way are going to influence it. So let's take a look at what the end result options are. One is you're either going to lease a space or you're going to own a space. So I'm going to go into a little more detail on lease versus owning, but there's a lot of times where ownership of a facility or a building just is not an option. You may be in a density of a market that just doesn't allow you to actually own a building in it, and you're going to have to lease. Other places, it's going to be cost prohibitive, so you're going to end up leasing. Or you could be in a third scenario where it is practical to purchase, and it's great if you can. Second piece that's going to affect it is the aesthetics and the design. So many of you maybe are thinking, hey, I want to put up a 10,000 square foot steel building and I'm going to house a bunch of animals in there. That may be a totally great solution for you. I don't believe most of our clients, when they come to us, are thinking, I want an awesome steel building with corrugated metal front and like and a door with no windows. That's not usually what people come to us, but yet the dollars and cents going through their head does reflect that level of finish. So it's you got to remember that every opening that you punch, every corner that you make, every finish that you apply has a cost. They don't all have to be expensive, but everything has a cost associated with it. Functionality within. So when we're talking about design, you get into your space, we want to know that we're going to be able to make that space function at its best for the type of business that you're running. Each one of you in the boarding and daycare world, and if you've got grooming included, all are going to function a little bit differently, even though conceptually we're doing the same types of things. The functionality within and what you want to deliver actually has a pretty big impact on how we want to lay out that space, quantity of animals into space, and then how we take care of it from an infrastructure standpoint. Cleanability. Sounds like it's super obvious, but guess what? You cannot clean everything. If I put wood, tongue and groove wood on your walls, how well do you think that's going to clean up? Probably not amazing. Wood is an absorbent material. It's just a matter of time till that gets destroyed. Now, there are some wood elements a person can put into the mix, but that's not going to be your primary. And then staff efficiency, right? So I need your staff and you need your staff to be able to move through the facility efficiently with the animals, as well as not wasting a bunch of time because we all only have 24 hours in our day. All right, quality of construction. When you are being asked for programming to design your space, or when you're dreaming up your space, I'm going to try and help you. This will probably be available after recorded as well, so you'd be able to go back to it if you'd like. But these are some guidance areas to help whoever is working with you come up with what the best solution is. Here are some quality levels to help guide whoever's designing, or if you're designing yourself. High end. Are you for the highest level deliverable across the board? Are you looking for a better than average facility, but not over the top? Or are you looking for that average? You want to put some decent quality in it, but you're not trying to set the benchmark by which other facilities will be judged. Those are some ways to describe those quality levels. I can tell you that most people have this in mind, the high end, and this for budget. And that usually doesn't work. It's hard to get the best high end with the average price point. So those do come into play. And I'll try and hit on some stuff later that will help you maybe spend the money in the right areas. These are some other components that might help drive some of the cost. The designated relief area out front, that doesn't have to be super expensive. That can be a fairly economical point, but it is easy for people to forget about having the nice little relief area out front. When you're talking about the outside, which I'll hit on a little bit more later, the enclosed area outside, how enclosed do we want to be? Some of you are in climates where you need to have that. Others maybe a little bit more mild and you can get away with just having it totally exposed. But all of those things add cost. So you want to be thinking about that all the time. Like, cost needs to be a factor, but I don't want you to use it as a reason to not deliver what you think is going to make your place successful. You do need to keep that in mind. So balance is going to be the secret to it. Some other things that can drive into it, I'm not sure how much of you will do cat stuff, but you can separate your vestibule, separate dog and cat entry, staff entry, all these different components can weigh into the overall impact of cost. Okay. So I'm going to hit vestibule real quick. Most of you may be familiar with that. A vestibule is usually a double entry door system. There are some requirements that make it be a certain size. We like it because if an animal does get loose, they have to have two sets of doors to get out. So that's always a recommended thing. It just so happens in the animal care world, it actually serves two purposes. The energy efficiency world says your building is more energy efficient if you create a vestibule. It tempers the air from your primary space into this vestibule as you let the outside air into it. So it creates a blended environment. That is an energy efficiency component, but like I said, for animals, it really helps with the extra protection in there. But there is a cost associated with having it. All right. Lease versus owning. So why would you lease? Well, the first one is it's probably you don't have property available. Your density might be too high for that market. Property's too expensive. I see that a lot. I've had a lot of people say, all right, I found a property. It's perfect. It's in a great location, highly visible. It's $1.4 million. That's a lot of debt to bring on to take on that facility, especially a vacant parcel. If you've already got a building on it, now all of a sudden the things might come together a little bit better on it. But that could be really expensive. You're going to develop a property and you've got a huge nut to crack just with the property purchase. The other one that's very sneaky that will easily derail a project and happens to developers all the time, which is infrastructure. And what I mean by infrastructure is your water, your sewer, your power, your gas. All of those pieces of the puzzle, if they are not readily available on your side of the road, you could be looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars to be able to connect. I've had to deal with going underneath roads for gas, for water, for sewer, highways, flagging systems, easily $100,000 to $200,000 in just bringing that in. And that's for a small project. On the side, it could be worth millions. The other one that's a little bit goofy that maybe you're not aware of is stormwater management. Even though that doesn't sound like an infrastructure, it is an aspect of infrastructure because every drop of rain that falls on your property right now, this vacant property, and you create impervious coverage, you need to manage that in some capacity. Sometimes you can sheet drain it and you've got enough space. Other times you got to create a structure, or in some places you actually have a centralized structure and you need to hard pipe into that. Those can all have pretty significant costs. So I bring that up because when you're looking at a parcel, even though it may be inexpensive, you may have large costs in getting the site even ready to accept a building. And the last one, which I hit on, I think in my last presentation and will hit on in every presentation in the future, is the infamous zoning. It is not a four-letter word, but it should be. It is the most difficult thing for us in this industry is working through the restrictions in zoning. You need to be aware of that when you're looking at a parcel. Your number one thing that you look for is zoning compliance or how you get properly zoned to be able to put your building there or your business in that location. And then these other components that I brought up about infrastructure are other big pieces of the puzzle. Okay, the advantage of property ownership, most of this is pretty obvious for people. Equity in real estate, right? You're going to buy this thing. You're going to be able to develop it. It's going to be worth a certain amount and you own it. So that's probably the number one reason. In addition to you get to design it exactly the way you want it. The only criteria with that will probably be regarding setbacks. Perhaps there's an architectural review board that'll tell you how much stone or glass frontage or whatever you need to have on it. But for the most part, it's going to be designed and built the way you want it. The other opportunity with it is it provides you a good spot for expansion. Now, if you purchased your property and you're looking at building it out at the maximum capacity right out of the gate, then you may not have expansion capacity on it. But for the most part, most of our clients are not maxing out right out of the gate. And so you've got the ability to expand, another advantage of having your own place. You could potentially look at an exit strategy long term. You could look at selling the business and then renting that property back to the new business owner. So there's another advantage in there. And then depending on the parcel size and where it's located, you could potentially subdivide that property, reselling and collecting some additional income. So there's some advantages in looking at purchasing, but it's got to make sense. And you really should study your cash flow to be able to make sure that that does make sense. There are these, I'm going to throw in a whole bunch of nuggets with this stuff that I don't even have written down. This could come down to lending as well. Your type of financing could influence whether or not you can subdivide the property and what the criteria is going to be associated with that. So you're going to want to check with your lender on whatever you're looking to do if that opportunity is sitting in front of you. Okay, I've got a bunch of pictures and stuff that I'm going to go through. I'm just really trying to point some things out because I want you guys to be thinking about this when it comes to cost. So in the picture down on the left, you see the before. up in the upper right, you see the after. Obviously, this picture down here is slightly positioned with the landscaping and the rocks and the nice fence, you know, white fence and some awnings on the windows, stone. All of these things come at an expense, and the size of all these spaces comes at an expense. One of the components, when you look at the left, you see a whole bunch of asphalt and some concrete. To improve that, you're looking at breaking some things up and replacing some of those spaces. So you could have a fair amount of exterior costs, even though you might be buying an existing building, to be able to make it the way you want it. What's the value of all that? That's the stuff that you're going to have to decide. But obviously, the nicer your fence, I've had people ask for some really nice wood fences. They were like $600 a linear foot. Not sure that that's going to be what makes sense for your business. But when it comes to fencing, which most of you know, if you're already, you know, ownership in this arena, you need that fence to go all the way down, and you need something below to make sure that they can't dig out. So just be aware that a standard fence, which is what ends up happening to a lot of our clients, is they're like, oh, I talked to someone, they said we can put a fence up pretty cheap. You can put a fence up pretty cheap. It may not be what's going to make sense for you and your business, but there are some cheap fences that you can put up. What you're going to find in this industry specifically as you go to do things is there is a super inexpensive option that can perhaps solve the problem. Likely, by the time you get all the adjustments made to the concept for it to work for your business, it's not going to be the least expensive option anymore. So you need to be prepared for those types of things, because in a commercial business, you need the robust nature of it, which doesn't typically allow you to do least expensive options. Plumbing. In the last couple years, actually since COVID, we saw plumbing numbers, for some reason, this industry went through the roof. I'm not exactly sure what drove it. I think some of it was wages, so that everyone dealt with a fairly significant wage increase. It hit all industries, so everyone has to pay more for labor. Sometimes the labor's not as good as it once was on top of it, so you're paying more for maybe not even as great a solution. But point of this picture, these three pictures, is there's a couple different styles. There's a trench drain, there's an individual floor drain, and then I also show a trench drain in the front out here as just another example of where it can go. But you could also have no drains, which is one of the least expensive ways to go, but you somehow have to still clean your facility. That is going to tie into a future slide here where we show a wet dry vac. The bathing and grooming side, another component. Most people are going to want to have some capacity of it, whether they're going to do a full grooming salon level or if they're just going to have a place to bathe pets. You need to plan the power. And if any of you have ever dried dogs, which I'm assuming most of you have, if you have electronic dryers, you're talking about a fair amount of energy draw on that location. Interestingly enough, when you put a bunch of cage dryers on to dry pets, you not only need the power to supply that, but you're also throwing an absolute boatload of heat into that space for whoever's working in there. So now you're cooking the animal to try and dry them, and you're cooking the person in the room as well. So that's another piece where your mechanical system, which is also known as HVAC, if you ever hear that terminology, mechanicals, they're referencing your heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system. The reason it's called mechanicals is because the system is actually a lot more than just heating and ventilation. It can go a lot further than that as more and more things get integrated and codes change. So the other thing is obviously wet dog in the room. What do you got? A lot of humidity in that room. So now you're looking at dehumidification, cooling on top of pumping a bunch of heat in there. You're basically creating a space with a major contradiction in and of itself, this little climate that you've created in this space. So you need to be factoring that in. Otherwise, what happens is you end up with an extremely humid room. High humidity in a space can create its own set of issues with it. So you need to have the adequate mechanicals to cool the space, exhaust the space, because as you all know, one of the greatest smells ever, wet dog. It's nice to be able to exhaust that out as well, right? So this space can get kind of intense when you're looking at what all goes into it. You can see in here, we're showing a window in and some wall protection. So this is just regular drywall, but we've got also some FRP in the back. That is handy to be able to have in there. And then we've got some drop down cords. In this case, we've got epoxy floor in there as well, which is a nice waterproof product to be able to use. In this space, I just wanted to show you guys some additional things that drive cost. In the bottom left corner here, I'm showing you that we've got kind of a stand system open to the top. This one, you can sort of ventilate the space. You've got a number of spots where we're going to have supply duct dumping air into the space, whether it's hot or cold air. And then you've got a return vent, usually back off, which will keep cycling the air through. You also can get set up with a wet dry vac. This would be if you were not going to put drains in, you can look at a wet dry vac system. Also, not the least expensive thing to do, but it can be a lot cheaper than cutting in a whole bunch of floor drains if you are not building a new building. Other thing that can drive cost is creating these individual rooms and the individual controls. You know, we're putting a little light switch in, we're putting a little light in there, individual dividers for the rooms, window in each space. Those types of things, very boutique-y, people love it. It's just got an expense to it. So those are components that can really start to drive cost up, at least on the enclosure side. Going to the outside, I wanted to point a couple things out. This glass garage door, I love these things. And there's a number of different styles out there. That's not a cheap garage door when you're looking at all glass. There are other styles that have just smaller window kits put in them. They don't offer as much light, but are more economical solutions. So as you're thinking about those, you got to think about what you really want in the space. In this case, you can see in this, they've got artificial turf, right? They've got a couple of hydrants out here, but they've also got a sail shade spot to be able to create a cooler environment as this synthetic grass starts to get warm. Any of you that have been on it when it's hot out, this stuff can get very, very hot. It is a plasticky product. So having a space, whether you're going to take a hose and hose it down to be able to cool it off, or want to create a sail shade, many of you may have seen playgrounds that have sail shades on them. Those sail shades, for like, let's say a 15-foot wide, 25-foot long triangle. I'm just going to do a triangle, not even a square. We're going to set 3 posts. You could be $15,000 to $20,000 into just that, versus this little umbrella space. Now, it's not the same thing. This can get obviously blown over if it's not put down. The other one is designed for those conditions to be out there all the time, but there's some pretty big dollars associated with that. So as you're making those decisions on how you want to do it, factor that in. Touched on this a little bit earlier, but these rooms can get really kind of nice as you're building things out. You know, if you're going to go this far and create this residential type suite, I mean, they've got blinds in there, they've got a full bed and 75 pillows, artwork on the wall. All of this stuff has cost that goes with it. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just as you're designing and building your space, got to be thinking about those. And it's very easy to forget about budgeting for that type of stuff, that there's going to be dollars and cents with it. I would always encourage you to try and budget for everything. When we look at overall project costs, construction and design is a piece of the puzzle, but it usually only makes up about 2/3 of the overall cost that you're going to deal with in a project, sometimes a little less. So you're going to have a lot of other expense that you need to be factoring in when you build your budget. All right. Theming, this one just a little bit of rustic. We got a little bit of wood here. I was talking about that earlier. You can have it outside in an aesthetic space, or outside of the run space, the enclosure, you can be here. But on the inside, obviously, we've got epoxy floor and we've got more wall protection on there to make sure that we're not going to be absorbing odors and we can clean the space. When you go into the indoor play area, I'm going to show you a couple things. This one is a very inexpensive floor that was put down. It's a rolled rubber floor. This is not the ideal product. The ideal solution is actually a rubber mat finish that we do that is a urethane top coat on it. That's really the best way to go about it. This product, when you go down and you start cleaning it, you actually have to reseal it fairly frequently. So when I talk about overall cost, you've got the initial cost, and then you've got your operational and longevity costs. You need to balance those things out. Does it make sense to spend less money now, get open, and do the repairs that are needed because the product isn't going to handle it long term? Or does it make more sense to spend the money in the front end and not have to deal with it or have minimal things to deal with after? That's really not our call. That is your call as a business owner to decide what makes the most sense for your particular business. In this room, I'm showing you, we've got wall protection around the perimeter. This product, I believe, was just FRP, but there is another product out there called Acrovin, and there's probably a few others as well. I'm just making you aware of it, but the reason we go back and forth is FRP has that classic, convenience store bathroom type look. If we're putting them in animal holding areas, we don't generally put the T strips between or that H strip that joins the two. We actually butt join them and use color match caulking so that there's not anything to grab to. But like in this space, you can get away with these H strips. The Acrovin is you have a ton more color options with it, which is why people like it, is you can get away from that traditional bubbly, pebbly type finish on it. But there's significant cost difference. So again, aesthetics, design, even though functionally they're basically the same, it's a sheet of plastic going on the wall. Aesthetically, that's going to be up to you to decide. Your mechanical in this space, same type of thing. Most of you, if you've built a facility, if nobody guided you, your mechanical system is probably inadequate. And your definition of adequate may be different. Remember, in the animal care world, we have to manage three different things when it comes to the mechanical system. We have to manage the temperature, which is just the set point of whatever that room is. We've got to manage odor, which is how frequently we exhaust and bring fresh air in. And then we're going to have to manage humidity. So when we're looking at those different things, the system, if you think about how the system works, to be able to get the odor out, we have to exhaust a lot more space. To exhaust the space out, I have to bring more fresh air in. If you have humid air outside and I'm bringing humid air in, that means I have to now condition that air as it comes into the space. So there is this circle that happens in the mechanical system for animal care facilities that is really, really tricky to get just right, because you need it to dehumidify, you need the odor, and you need to be able to hit your set point on your temperature. The interesting part is the government doesn't care. And so what they do is they put codes in place that actually contradict what you're trying to achieve. So the efficiency that you're trying to get to, they actually make you put additional product in that tempers the air. So it's an energy reventilator. It's just a way to mix the air so that you don't have to use as much energy to get the set point achieved by the air coming in. I know that's pretty technical, but I'm more just bringing it up because the mechanical system is going to be a huge cost associated with your facility, and your target is going to decide what type of system is chosen for it. So you're going to have to decide if you're managing for all three, you're going to have pretty good dollars into it. If you're managing for just a couple, you're going to be able to save a little bit of money. You're going to give something up. Again, it all comes down to scope. This one, just showing you a couple of examples of some pools, a couple of different ways to do it. As a general rule, I'll tell you guys, if you can keep your air temp and water temp similar, you'll have less evaporation, which means you have less dehumidification to try and manage. Whatever you do, you are going to want to try and have drains around the perimeter to be able to bring that water in. Just a little side note for you. If you don't have the drains, then obviously that water sits there and you got to squeegee it somewhere. Just a little tidbit. If you're going to go with a pool, I know lots of places that have a kiddie pool. That's just a little plastic one they bring out and throw some water in it, and dogs love it. that can work too, depending on the days. So that's we'll call it a very budget friendly option. Sometimes just holding a hose, they're excited about. So anyway, some other stuff I wanted to show you guys. You can go with grinder sink, like I'm showing right here, as well as a double decker system. If you guys have, I'm not sure of everyone's situation, but if you are looking at a double decker system, you can see it goes right to the top in here. One of the trade-offs with this is the staircase. So your upper level has to have a walkway alongside of it. So your lower level is going to be a certain depth. Your upper level is going to be probably -4 feet. So if your lower level is 8 feet, you have a 4 foot walkway, a 4 foot wide upper run, if you will, if you need to do double decker. I would not, as a general rule, design for having a double decker system. But it can be a way to get you additional space if you're in an existing condition type scenario. It just has to make sense, because when you start chewing up space with staircases, you lose space that way as well, and you are going to be forced into a code compliance. So it isn't like you can just, oh, I can make that work. No, it actually has to meet code. So we're gonna have that. Indoor turf. Not done a ton. I like the idea of it, but here's the number one challenge you're going to have with it. You need to be able to rinse it down to be able to keep the odor down on it. To do that, you're probably going to need something underneath that floor, whether it be an epoxy type finish or something that won't absorb the water. And then we're going to need something to actually move a lot of air in that space as well as dehumidify. So otherwise it is going to stink. It's not going to take long. So you really need to look at actually a lot of energy going into that space if you're really going to have an indoor turf space, at least at a large size. Smaller size, maybe not as big a deal. You can probably manage that. But if you're actually going to have a legit indoor play area, that is one of the challenges that I see out there. So you might have a lot of energy into this space for a lot of dollars. And then just going a little bit further with, interior space, if you're going to spend money, again, that's the whole topic of this thing, is what's your expectation? If you're putting just a sea of enclosures into space, you can have a giant box and you can just put the, modular dividers in there. If you're going something more elaborate, more modern, you're going to be pumping a lot more dollars into it. I would hope that you are charging appropriately for your type of model that you're delivering to the clients.
Eric, before you go on
Yeah.
to the next slide, there was a question about what a grinder sink is.
Oh, so right here is they will pick up any of the solids, dump them in here, and then this will have a grinder in it. They flush it down, and that'll go into the public sewer or septic system. Animal waste is a little tricky. Generally, public system, not as big a deal. But on the septic side, you can run into sewage enforcement officers that have a problem with that. So you are going to want to know what they're going to allow you to do. But the grinder sink is a way to avoid just throwing it in trash can, freezing, throwing it away, or whatever your fecal management plan is. In your zoning application, you may actually have to demonstrate what is your fecal management plan. So you're going to want to be aware of how you're going to deal with it. I will say, when it comes to these grinder sinks, they're also known as a service sink. There's a couple different terms out there for it, but basically you're going to be able to dump a solid in there. It will grind it up as opposed to like a normal human toilet. This is actually be able to design for perhaps something that's been out for a while, hardened, and you're putting in there. So that's why they have the grinder style. But it does need a certain amount of water pressure to work. So I have had to add some pressure to some places because there wasn't enough water pressure to start with. So just another piece of the puzzle, but really handy if you can make it fit in your project. That's a great way to deal with it. If you can't, you can't, but there's the awareness of it. So outdoor, I touched on this a little bit earlier. Was showing you the pool earlier. This is a very basic, like P-rock style with a vinyl fence, and then you've got stuff more elaborate with, a fair amount of grass, canine grass in here, and how that's all done. Big part of the budget, right? Depending on your location, if you are very, very rural, there's a good chance that you are not going to get your hand forced on your landscaping side. But if you are in a city, there's a chance that they're going to make the landscaping be a big part of your project. And I don't know the answer to that because it's going to be different for each one, but I have had multiple scenarios where you could have 50, $75,000 into just landscaping above and beyond what you're planning to do for outdoor exercise. So it's hard to know that answer to begin with, but if you are looking at going into the municipality and asking if people are complaining about landscaping, likely it's because they're forcing your hand on what you have to do with it. And like everybody, everyone wants their place to look really nice, and that's really not a question of if you want your place to look nice. Everyone does. It's when the city says you have to have 75 crepe myrtles at this distance, spaced out in this capacity, and they need to be this caliber, and you realize that each one of those trees is $350 a piece. That can get a little bit painful when your hand starts getting forced that way. And sorry if I sound negative on municipalities, but I'm not a big fan of everyone being government telling you what you have to do for for your business and what you think makes sense for your business. So um, I get some things. I think they push that a little bit too far in many areas. Okay. I know I'm blowing through stuff pretty quickly for everybody. When you're looking at building an overall budget, the things that you're going to take into account and need to factor in right away, your site acquisition costs. So if you're going to spend $1 million on a piece of property and you have $2 million to work with for your entire project, and you need to fit the rest of your building and all of your equipment and everything else that goes into this project in that $1 million, and you're spending $1 million on property, you're going to have probably a hard time pulling that off. Not to say that you can't, but just to give you an example of you can really distort your project if you're going to spend a lot on the property. Sometimes it's the only choice, and you need to be charging appropriately to be able to make that work. Your project type, obviously, if you're going to lease something, you need to decide if you're going to stick the dollars into that space from a lease standpoint that makes sense from a long-term perspective because somebody else's property. So this is always the challenge. Like, how far do you go when it's somebody else's property? If your contractor or designer are good and experienced, they should be able to help guide you on, hey, here's the middle of the road stuff. Here's the long-term stuff. Here's the stuff that you're going to have to potentially deal with more frequently. You're going to have to decide what makes the most sense for you. Covered earlier, infrastructure for your site. You may need a 1.5 inch water line coming to your building. I've run into places where an 1.5 inch water line tap fee was $70,000. That would be good to know going into your project that a water tap fee is at that level. So you want to find that type of stuff out if you're looking at new development. If you're an existing facility or you're looking at renovating an existing building, obviously those pieces are probably not going to be as big a deal because you've already got stuff established. Hopefully what you've got coming in is adequate. Aesthetics, covered that a little bit. If you are looking at a steel building or something like that, um, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There are some little things you can do to dress it up. You can put a little bit of stone on it. You put a few windows around, maybe put a little overhang over your entrance. You can give it a nice look. Even a couple dormers potentially would enhance what the overall look of your facility is. So that's going to be up to you, but that's a big part of what drives cost. In my world, we call them MEPs, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. Any contractor you talk to, they're all going to talk about MEPs because those things are what drive all of the costs of the project. More electrical, I don't know if some of you know this, but there was electrical panels that were on a 52-week lead time. That was the main distribution panel for your building. You could get it as long as you were willing to wait a year. That's a long time to wait for just an electrical panel, but that existed, and that's all for the most part caught up from COVID, but there are still some effects of that still sitting out there depending on what you need for your project. But mechanical, that's going to be your HVAC system. that can be very intense. You could be looking at a system that is a variable refrigerant flow, or you could be looking at standard packaged rooftop units, or you could be looking at an interior furnace system. I realize that that's probably in a little bit of the weeds for everybody on the call, but there are multiple levels of systems. They all perform a little differently. You may, in your area, depending on what codes have been adopted, you might not have much choice in what's in there. Hopefully, the majority of you are in a situation where you do have influence on it, and it's okay to be able to design it the way you think makes the most sense. But government's got their hand in there and is going to tell you that, okay, to meet this energy code, you need to be able to do this. You've got animals in this space. We're going to require you to exhaust at this level. That could drive your project up. And you don't want to find out when you're ready to start construction. You really want to find that out a lot sooner. What are you up against from that standpoint? Plumbing, probably the biggest influence is what you're going to do with your drain system. So you want to either check out other facilities that have it, or if you have an existing facility and you like something or you don't like something, check out other options and just make sure that you like what direction you're going to go with it. I didn't touch on a lot of this earlier, but site development, this is what is all done outside of where the building is. So your fencing, your landscaping areas, but also the grading of the site, your parking lot, the curbing, stormwater, all of those things, which really don't do a lot for generating revenue, but they can be a very expensive component of the site. It's not uncommon to have $300,000 to $600,000 into site work, depending on your size of building. It climbs very, very quickly. And if you don't have soils that are suitable, that's your next issue, is you've now got to replace soils or bring in soils or redesign your overall slab to be able to deal with the fact that your soils don't have the bearing capacity of other soils. Again, I'm not trying to scare everybody by saying all the doom and gloom. My objective here is actually to equip and prepare you to make good decisions as early as you can on. Just being aware that there's a hole or a potential pitfall to avoid can help you in trying to ask good questions and make good decisions as you go forward. The material and longevity, so overall performance. So the products that you're putting into this space, whether it's doors, whether it's your STC rated walls, whether it's your flooring, the better stuff that holds up long term is going to cost more money. There is no, oh, I'm going to buy this product for a fraction of the price and get the exact same longevity out of it. That generally doesn't work. There are a few things that you can have maybe a material cost come down because it was at the closeout place, and you can do that. So that is a possibility of same with the material, but your installation cost is going to be the same. It's if they're putting something down, it doesn't matter what you paid for the material, the cost of the install is going to be the same. So like I said, there's not really a magic wand for it. If you're going to accept a limited supply option, you could save some money on materials. But then expansion, and if you don't buy enough, you can run into a problem with having to deal with filling that in. Okay, I blew through a lot of stuff there. I had intentions on even going further with all of you, but I was worried that might be more than enough and I could answer questions. So I will call her quits there, and you guys can fire away, and I'll do my best to give you good guidance and good answers.
If anybody thank you, Eric. Let me start by saying that was wonderful. If anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask directly, or you can drop them in the chat. I'm just laughing in my mind, Eric, thinking back to some research that I did probably 20 years ago, and the fact that the municipality of Anchorage wanted us to put 75 parking spaces in the front of our building, and it was based on occupancy of people, pets, as well as the square footage of the building. And so we actually looked at our existing facility, and we ran a video for like 36 hours of just cars coming and going. And the fact that we were a drop off pickup business, there was never a time when we had more than maybe 6 or 7 cars in the parking lot. So yeah, it's interesting what the government regulations want to push on you when it's our industry is unique in some ways.
Well, and there are no in reality, in the defense of the majority of the people working in there and having to implement the rules, that there isn't a ton of precedence here. It isn't like boarding has been around for a really, really long time, but what it is today is nowhere near what it used to be. And it's not uncommon for zoning laws to be 50 and 60 years old.
Right.
So you do have to understand that there's maybe a level of ignorance in the government, and most places have ways of presenting legitimate data like you did to be able to get them to, let's say, the appropriate light of your project. So that's
Oh.
a good point.
Sarah commented that she had to do the same. Oh, yeah, interesting. Uh, any other questions? All right. Well, if that is it, then we will sign off. And thanks so much, Eric, for joining us today. And if people have questions, his contact information is up on the screen. Feel free to reach out. And Terwisha is one of our live event sponsors this year. So if you are coming to the Business Breakthrough Workshop in Denver, Colorado next month, they will be there as well. So feel free to take a moment and stop at their booth and talk to them. They have a wonderful team and they're great to work with. So we're just excited that that they were able to join us today for this presentation. And we will end there.